time for the third Daniel Greene book so far. So far we've reviewed every book Daniel Greene has published, which is, kind of funny to think about. However, this time it isn't a Lawful Times book series. It is a new series called Neon Ghost, and this is called, I think, A Witch's Sin. Like, in my head, I just call it Neon Ghost. Because the cover, like this is the cover sleeve thingy, but Neon Ghost. So let's see, it doesn't say something. A Witch's Sin. There we go. I got it. We got there in the end. And so this is a sci-fi and fantasy book, whereas the others were just more pure fantasy with a little bit of sci-fi-esque in it, I suppose you can say. And which is fitting for his channel that he's now also foraging into the science fiction or more of science fiction-esque world. Given that his YouTube channel is basically, is science fiction and fantasy. I think now he's changed it to just speculative fiction. Anyways, so when looking at Goodreads for this book, it has a 3.71 out of 5 with nearly 500 ratings and almost 100 reviews. Which, the less than 4 stars in Goodreads does show that people are a little split, but I would still argue that it's a good score. Like, since it goes up to 5, 2.5 is in the middle, so you would assume that's average per bit closer to 3. So almost like being closer to 4 is pretty darn good when you think about it. But it still shows that there's a significant amount of people rating it lower, and that's okay. I also have to take into account when we look at these reviews here is it's not like 500 ratings on Goodreads is not that many, especially when you think about like the huge audience that reads these type of books. So is it a representative group? How many of them are his fans, his haters, and so on? But given this book is a Kickstarter book, you could argue that most of them are probably his fans, so it might be skewed positively. But it's still hard to say because I did read some of the reviews and they did seem like pretty fair and agreed with what I thought of the book. Now, if we look at the cover, so this cover here is absolutely beautiful. I love the way Taya's rendered. I think she's gorgeous and it's straight up taken from the book and it's so good. And I love how on the backside it's just the mirrored cover. If we look on the inside, because I didn't bring the dust sleeve, so we'll just do it like this. This is the colored version. And here we get like the exact scene from the book and the font and everything. It looks so good. And I am so like excited to read it whenever I see this book. If I saw this book in a bookstore, I would absolutely buy it right away. No questions asked. Also, I love the little ghost thing. It's so cute. And the cover is done by Sarah Alfonso. And the design and layout is done by STK Creations. And Bryce O'Connor did the art direction. But really, so like Sarah Alfonso, great job. Looks amazing. That's all I can say. Now let's get to the first section, which is the first 6 chapters. In the foreword of this book, usually I don't talk about it, but we'll discuss it a little. Because Greene talks about how the story is a reflection of how he feels with his own mental trauma and problems. And I'm going to say now, we're not going to try and armchair diagnose him, nor am I the right one to say if the issues he does show are correct. I will, however, comment on if I feel like what he, like, as someone who does not have mental issues at all, luckily, if it makes me either like understand or if it makes sense to me as someone watching from the outside in, because I think that's an interesting detail to look into is when you're trying to represent mental health illness, how well do you convey it to someone who has not experienced it on his own body? So we will keep the sentiment into mind, but we'll also look into the flow of the book, like because is it actually gonna be taking us out of the story, or is it actually like fitting? And so I guess let's just start out with the story. The story starts out almost like in media res, with minimal world building, exposition, or character introduction. Really, it does work quite well for the story, especially given for the most part, the world isn't that complex to figure out what's going, like to follow. So I can't quite figure out if I like the fact that the world is one oversized large skyscraper, large enough to house the other multi-floor buildings, because the concept it's really cool. But then you start to think about like, I guess because I'm an engineer, then you start to think if you have a large building, let's say this is a large building. Now we made the building even larger, and then wind blows up here. Because wind blows, the higher up you are, the more powerful the winds are. At least from my understanding of how like weather works. Which means from engineering, we know the force here multiplied by the length is gonna make a huge amount of torque down here. So when you think of it like that, a giant skyscraper is not that realistic. However, doing something like this, we just have a bunch of, still skyscrapers, but a bunch of buildings clumped closely together. That would probably make more sense, especially in a 3D printed world. But then again, we build houses that are like a kilometer tall, or skyscrapers, so it might not be that out of the way. But I feel like then there would be a huge amount of space used on like anti-earthquake and wind, like wind reduction measures and stuff. So the world, if you don't think too hard, seems logical and makes sense, and it is in its own little book and series here. It is pretty consistent, but when you start to delve a bit too deep into it, it kind of falls apart with the world building. It's not going to take you out of the story. It took me a little out because I'm an engineer, so I was just like, okay, we're just 3D printing something huge. That seems a little weird. And a little unrealistic in my opinion, but hey, it worked for the story, and it's interesting enough, so it's fine. I do like, though, when we talk about the world, the dystopian vibe that's going on with the overly aggressive ads that's all over the place, and it makes you almost like what we have here and fear what we could get. And by that I mean with like all the streaming services are now like, oh, you're paying for the standard package. Well, the standard package now has ads because you're only paying standard and not premium standard. Like here it's more like, oh, well, screw you no matter what you do. So I want to also talk a little bit about what we could call our three main characters, which is Taya and then Juno and Quinn. So starting with Taya as our protagonist. And wait, what? Okay, let's start with Juno, because now I'm reading my script again to make sure I'm not messing up. Let's start with Juno, who is Taya's friend who studies at the university. She's more of an overbearing, protective friend, and it almost glimpses at times at something deeper than a friendship. Like they have a story of, like, it's almost sexual. And I feel like the name Juno isn't totally random, being the name of the wife of the Roman god Jupiter. Juno was seen as the principal protector of the Roman Empire, and we see this in the protection story when Juno kept asking Taya to leave the Enforce alive, and Juno's kind of trying to protect Taya and take care of her, even though she has her own mental issues she's dealing with and grief and all. And then we have Quinn, and I feel like Quinn must be Greene's favorite name, because it's also in his Lawful Time series. Well, anyways, Quinn is more of a teacher and protector of Taya, at least for the most part of the book, and they don't always quite see eye to eye. But they do make it work, at least in the start. And they clearly somewhat, in the beginning when we, in the first 6 chapters here, care about each other. And so I looked up Quinn, because Juno was not coincidental name, so I'm like, okay, maybe Quinn is not quite coincidental, and it's not, at least I don't think it is, because it's an old Irish Welsh name, meaning wise, sense, or reason, which is the role he plays in the book. Like, he kind of works as a wise mentor who's seen the world and trying to help Taya being this enforcer. And then talking about Taya, our protagonist, who is also my favorite character in this book, other than Snubs. She's funny and sassy, but also quite relatable. And her name means joy or happiness, which is 100% if any of the names are chosen deliberately, this is chosen out of irony. She's dealing with guilt, depression, probably also PTSD, and she handles it about as well as you could imagine. It's kind of a classic trope that if your protagonist does something meaning happiness, her life is not happy. It's in Denmark when we have to study any movie or something. If her name character's life, it means she got her name because her parents wanted her to have a great life, but her life is always shit. And it's kind of the same here. Her name is Happiness. She's all but happy, and she doesn't really become happy at all. Now, some aspects I like about the story. Let's get back to the story. Is how fully integrated the world is with the technology and everything. Like it seems like everything has been going on for quite a while, and it's thought out in concept, and it works for the story. And I haven't really, with the technology itself, been like finding anything odd, like they kind of wouldn't, like with the skyscraper. I had a problem with the talk. I haven't found any things that, with the technology, like the pinging each other instead of asking for names, etc. I can totally get that. I could totally see if the Apple Vision Pro got like actually was success and worked. I could totally see people were gonna go that way, or like the Sword Art Online, not the series, the movie one where they had the basically Google Glass, like all of that. I could see if it works, it will get popular, and people will 100% not ask, but just be like, "I'll ping you," kind of like almost like we do on Facebook, Twitter, etc. Um, then there was this scene, like let's talk about the. Oh my god, I'm veering so much off my script. So let's talk about the story a little. It's kind of a pseudo detective story in the way that, like the vibes it gives, and we get like it's definitely a mystery with the plot. Tea's not, but Tea's not a detective, so it's not really a classical detective novel. But I guess that's kind of on purpose in a way, because it kind of gives us this awkward stumbling, and it's a place for it to learn. And talking about awkwardness, the scene where Helga tried to act coy and hide who she is, it was fine. It was a little too awkward for me, but again, it highlights like a lot of people don't really know what they're doing, and even though typically in books they're shown as they do it the first try, so it works. Then there's the vampire Oscar. I want to talk a little about that, and I like him a lot as a character, and I like the scenes we get with him. He's funny, and I like the back and forth we get with Taya. I really only have two issues, and one is the speed of which Oscar, like especially with when they help each other, kind of thing. Like when they decide to agree on helping each other and all. Like the flip flopping Oscar does between being an underdog and being in control in the discussion is a little too fast. It's almost like whiplash fast. I wish Greene would just slow it down just a little bit. And then there's the entire like racism aspect towards the undead. And I get the racism part, it makes sense on the surface level, but I'm not sure it's the type of racism I want in the book. And that makes no sense to say because you really don't want any racism, but here we are. It's like the vampire thing feels a little tacked on and not very fleshed out. Because it's a virus that kills people and makes them vampires. So it's kind of like you have to feel bad because it's not something they were born with. Like racism, when you think about it, usually people who. Like racism towards black people is because they're born black. But here it's like people just got sick and died. That would be the same as everybody just randomly hating on cancer people. Like, who hates a person with cancer? Well, I decided to end the section like after before chapter 6 because of Quinn talking Taya out of the job thing. The entire scene was just like upsetting. Not because of what was said from Quinn, but how he said it. So that's why I think it was a perfect place to stop it. But the next section here is we're going into is from chapter 6 up to chapter 12. So that's like the next quarter of the book or something like that. Shit, the section starts hard with an anxiety attack. I know Greene said the book would deal with mental health in a heavy way, but this is like above what I expected. Especially because you can tell it was written from like either a personal experience or very close to home experience. With how scared and trapped she felt. And here we get to see a more human and compassionate Quinn, which I like a lot. But really want to talk about because we did discuss like a bit on how would it feel for the story, and I think it worked really really well in the story with the panic attack, and also I think Greene shows it in a realistic way, but very tactful. I think you can say, and I like that a lot. So definitely huge props for that. And the more of Quinn we get, the more I feel like he is a jerk, just like Snubs describes. I think Snubs is being more honest about who Quinn really is, and it wouldn't surprise me if he was part of the scheme all along, and that's how they found the body so fast. This is called foreshadowing. When Taya got to Naomi to get like the gun specifically, not this gun? No, not this gun. This is just a gun. To get a gun, I don't think there's any. Oh, there's boobs here. I should probably not show that on YouTube. YouTube don't like stuff like that, but too late. It's described as them having a bit of a flirtatious, um, like feel like discussion, like they were lightly flirting, and I never got that. It felt as pure business, though familiar, like a more relationship between the seller and the regular. However, when Taya was with Snubs, that was fun, and we get the feeling of them being more than friends. So really, I think with Naomi, it was a missed opportunity, um, and it was so sad because it had good like it had potential to be a really fun character dynamic between the two of them, and really be flirtatious. I think what Greene needs to do when he does that is ham things up a little, because I think it almost feels like he's afraid of doing too much. But honestly, I think he can't do too much. I think he just needs to do more. Now, you can tell that Taya and Snubs though are friends, and that Snubs cares a lot for Taya, is which is also why he is like operating on her, even though he is against it. My man is just a good friend taking care of his friend. I especially like the banter we got when they were theorizing what could potentially be going on, like the entire mystery. And that's what I mean with Greene and hamming it up, because I feel like he kind of went a bit overboard on Snubs, but because of that, like that it's a written media and all of that, it works well and it doesn't feel too bad. Like it doesn't feel like it's overboard. It actually feels perfect. And something else I like, I also think the chemistry between Oscar and Taya is getting better, and Oscar does seem like an interesting character. I still can't decide if I think vampires make sense, and now we're introducing magic. I don't know, man. It's difficult. It's difficult to say. Now, talking of magic, visiting Jordan, that was a fever dream. Well, yeah, and Taya got one of those, where she meets the soul of Sid, which was really good. It was well written, the pacing was good, and it was emotionally heavy. Greene really understands how to channel grief, anxiety, and possibly PTSD and depression. Like it really, I felt like I understood how and why she felt the way she did. And I think when you're dealing with such heavy themes as those things are, you really need to be sure that your reader, if they don't have it themselves, they understand it. Now, now I have completely lost. So yeah, if you didn't know anything about Taya's past, you would think she's just bratty and a bit of a jerk and a bad friend, and she is all of those. But but by knowing her background, you get a glimpse into why and how broken she really is, and I do like that a lot. I really don't think the magic is the right solution to my sci-fi book. I feel like you could have done this with science fiction, and it would have worked equally as well. But so far, it isn't overbearing. But let's see, we are entering the final half of the book, so I feel like magic's gonna take a bigger role in that second half. That is also called foreshadowing. So I read most of this section forgetting to write notes. So forgive me there if there's important things I normally would talk about that I skip. After the talk with Jordan and we learned that magic is real, it feels like the book takes on another type of story. It takes on more of an anti-religious theme almost. It almost feels like the Crusaders are supposed to be like the Catholics, with the naming and the white gold color scheme. It wasn't what I expected. I expected the book to be more of an anti-Bezos Musk theme. I mean, you could argue if you make one of them religious, then you got James. But it's not the billionaire who's the bad guy anymore in the way. It feels more like it's the religious fanatics, who are then also, in this case, billionaires. But it's more like the combination and not the one thing. So visiting Sarah was quite interesting. It was fun to learn how Robert tried to fight against his dad, but ultimately it wasn't that special of a read. It felt a bit generic to me. I would have loved for Sarah to show more emotion. I know she was supposed to have accepted her fate, but still, it wasn't as interesting to read as if we got to see her act with more regret, anger, or sadness. And I called it earlier that Quinn was part of it all, and he was. He was basically the right hand man of Robert, which explains a few things. One, why Quinn really hates vampires. Two, why he was so keen on getting Taya to leave the case. And finally, why Taya never got to see his apartment. While Quinn ultimately probably did see Taya as a friend, I think his loyalty to the benefits of the laborers weighs more. Also, can we talk about laborers? I get it's an ironic comment on the fact that laborers are exactly what these people aren't, but it really feels like an unrealistic name in my opinion. I don't think anyone would voluntarily go by that name. If I were part of them, I would switch my last name as soon as possible. Alright, back to the story. I dislike Jordan a lot. Fuck her. She's annoying. She seems like she thinks she knows what she does is okay and all that, like because it's for the greater good. But I don't think she deserves to have her methods forgiven. Mainly because normally those characters would get results or do something themselves. But she doesn't. And I think Greene is going for that too in a way. And then finally Taya being turned into a vampire was predictable and expected. Not that it's bad, but it didn't surprise me. Especially because so far in all three of his books, Greene has had someone turn into something else, like a monster or some fantasy thing. The section of Taya learning to control herself and her talk with birds was fun. I would have liked more of that, to be honest, like because they showed so much characterization. And I think if Greene had done that for more of his characters, the entire book would have been better. Elaborate a little bit on it. The scene where Juno tries to see her and they manage to shake hands was such a powerful scene. But just like the rest of the book, Taya should just have listened to Juno from the start. Normally a repeating pattern like that would annoy me, but I think Greene managed to not make it so. Something I really enjoyed though were the killing of Quinn, and I enjoyed that a lot. I think it was very cathartic and deserved. Also learning that it was all just money to him was perfectly in character and perfectly horrible in every way possible. So I only really have two more things I want to comment on because the book is basically almost over. Firstly, I fucking hate the manipulative shit that Jordan is. She acts as if she gives Taya a choice, but she's just a fucking manipulative bitch. Secondly, Greene really likes to transform his protagonists, making them superhuman in a way. He's done that in his lawful time series too, but I gotta comment, like in transforming him. That's why I feel like Taya turning into a vampire was very predictable. Now let's get to the conclusion. You can tell Greene is improving his craft as a writer compared to the first two books, but he still makes a few stumbles here and there that are a bit annoying in a way, you can say. Like, he likes to muse a lot of philosophy, which in and of itself is fine. I love when writers do that. It just doesn't come off as poetic and profound as he probably thinks it does or hopes it does. Especially the TV interviews feels a little off. They're a bit too much and they pull you out of the story because they don't add a lot. I also think the skyscraper world we talked about with the cities on the floors are interesting in idea. But when you stop to think about it, the way the gravity, tectonic movement, all that stuff we talked about, like, it just falls apart. Now, when reading the book, it isn't a huge deal. Greene does a good job never overselling nor pulling too much of the attention to the problem. However, the exploration of grief, anxiety, and PTSD are all done amazingly well. You can tell Greene knows what he's talking about, sadly. And sadly, it seems like he's also drawing from personal experience. But at the same time, he tries to tackle with what it means to be human. And that really falls flat to me. I get it with the discussion about vampire rights, etc., but it just never seemed like a proper discussion that's going on. You have the TV personalities discussing it, musing about it, but you don't have anyone yelling at the vampires. You don't have any demonstrations. You've got nothing. People are staring angrily at Oscar and later on Taya, and then they move away out of fear. But I think it would be great to see like demonstrations outside of vampire homes, see people who support vampires be ostracized in specific neighborhood, and stuff like that. I think Greene should have looked at more of like the 50s and 60s America with the height of the KKK before the Equal Rights Act. Like, he should take a bit more inspiration because he is going for this racism allegory. And I feel like he's halfway there. He's just missing that last piece. The story of itself, though, is fine. I like how he tries to make it more of a detective story, and Taya sucks all the way through. I think in a world where everything is corporate and everything you need is literally printed, it makes sense to make that your enemies. And Greene shows moments of brilliance in character writings, like with Taya and Snobs, Taya and Juno, but also shows the struggles with casual flirting, like when we visit Naomi. It's really of a mixed bag. And with that statement, I think I summed up the book. It's a mixed bag. It's not a bad book. It just has its struggles. Would I recommend it? If you're into cyberpunk and a sci-fi, yes, I probably would say give it a shot. But if you're not normally that interested in those two genres, I would give it a pass if I were you. I don't think it's worth it for, like, if you're not really into those. Now please leave a like, comment and subscribe with that. I don't know how to end it really, because I think he's on the right track. I just think he kind of needs someone to, like, to help him a bit more. I feel like he's gotten far, but I feel like he needs a little extra. And I'm not going to say I'm better, but hopefully, I don't think he'll ever see this, but if you do, Daniel, please take that extra step. Go deeper. You know, you got it. You have the opinions. You have the thoughts. Just go deeper. Now, with that said, next week we'll take on the next Ranger's Apprentice book, which would be the 5th book. And please leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more. Thank you,